Good afternoon here. Today is Monday, July the 13th, 2026, almost halfway through the month. Well, as we have been putting in our newsletters here that the end of 570 News Kitchener has happened, as well as 5 other radio stations. So joining us here to start this coverage off this week is from Music Radio WGS, Jim Snyder. Jim, thank you so much for taking some time to join me on this Monday afternoon at the time of this recording.
Are you sure you want to have me on this one? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, there goes the license.
So you just got to be careful about that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, glad to join you. So the Ali Musa Radio Network. So how many affiliates you got?
We have three here, part of the Musa Slobodian Network. So we have the Ali Musa Show, which, as we just heard in the intro there. We have the Ali and Makara Show, which, and we also have the Books Panel.
Well, golly, you're doing more than I am. I think the kid down the street from me with a Panasonic tape recorder has more listeners than I do. You know, so. So can you tell that I have no life, Ollie? Can you really figure that? You know, have you figured that out yet? Just here in the first 10 seconds.
Oh, I think you do.
Well, I try to get out of here every now and then. They do let me out of here every so often. But,
oh, sure. Yes.
But no, that's great. You've got a couple of different platforms that you're doing, and that's something to be said. And as a former guest of yours, a previous guest that you've had on in the past, I guess in the last few iterations of your podcast, Don Collins, I consider him a good friend and he was a boss of mine. Said, Ali, you don't need terrestrial radio anymore, and you really don't. So I mean,
yes, and I'm often reminded of that.
Well, you don't. And
no, you don't.
It's kind of what's going on with everything right now. But I digress. No, that's great that you're doing this. And, for those who don't know what Music Radio WJS is, it's a internet-based radio station that I'm running and have been running here for probably the last 3 years minus one, when I had to take it down for a little while, about a year and a half, actually, because I had some software issues. And working with a vendor that I had started with, things weren't going too well. So basically, I had to just shut it off and start from scratch, and spent 15 months, putting all kinds of music, putting all the music back into this new software program that I'm now using, and getting it all, because you're playing music, you have to worry about royalties, you have to do all this stuff, you want to have all the artist and title information and everything. So I had to enter all of this stuff in by hand. Over 12,000 cuts. That's all the audio. 12,000 cuts. That's everything that you hear on the radio station, whether it be a jingle or a sweeper or a song or whatever. All that has to be put in by hand. They have to be entered. They have to be dumped in and put in, and you get all the stuff into it, and it takes time. So. Anyway, so that's what I've been doing.
Perfect.
That's what's been going on, and I'm having more fun than any human being should be allowed to have. So, and I get to do the kind of show that I've always wanted to do, and work at a station that I've always wanted to work at. I just don't get paid for it, and I don't care, because, I call it I bill it as North America's least listened to radio station, and it's true. I'd like to find somebody who has less listeners than I do. In all seriousness, I have a few. I mean, we have people that listen. I have people that listen in Michigan and Ohio and in Colorado and California. I mean, I've had people, across Ontario and all over the place. So you never know. I mean, I don't know. You looked at your analytics. who might be, popping on what you got. I mean, you just don't know.
No, exactly.
You just have fun with it, and I don't care. The pressure's off. I mean,
no, I don't either. To be honest, I don't care. I don't even look at the analytics and all that.
I did for a bit with my podcast. The Jim Snyder podcast is still out there, and I'm going to add to it here eventually. There just hasn't been a lot for me to really talk about because the podcast was essentially, if you recall, was my life story.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like nothing really earth-shattering. I mean, there is some stuff that's going on, but we won't get into that right now. But maybe at some point, and I'll do some more episodes. But the radio station has really, honestly taken up just a lot of my time, and rightfully so. And not to really toot my own horn here.
No, you're good. You're good.
It is. I'll be honest. I think it sounds as good as anything else that's out there. For a one-man band. I mean, I can only do so much. I mean, would I love to have an army of disc jockeys and give away cars and houses and vacations and flyaways and all that stuff like what radio stations used to do when radio was fun? Absolutely, but it's not going to happen. But the whole premise of the radio station is to. And I don't want to get off on this because we didn't get together to talk about me necessarily. But
no, it's I don't mind. I'm happy. I don't mind.
But the whole premise of the radio station, for those of you who are interested, if you like music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and a little touch from the 2000s, that's what this radio station is about, and it's about bringing back memories. If you remember a song that you heard on the radio when you were in high school, or when you went on your first date, or your first day in high school, or you remember, my parents used to ride around in the car with this song on all the time, or I remember listening to this song, I was at my grandparents' house, et cetera, et cetera. That's really what it's all about. And I get to do a show every afternoon when I'm not on vacation. That's what I'm not doing a show this week because I'm on vacation, but I'm taking time out to hang out with my buddy Ollie.
Absolutely.
Ollie, consider yourself lucky that I'm taking time for my vacation, from my busy broadcast schedule to take time to come on your show. So,
well, I always appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it. So anyway, enough me running my mouth here.
All right. Yes. So the end of 570 News. I'm going to just straight out. How did we sort of get here? Did it catch you by surprise?
No, it did not.
Me neither.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because for two reasons, and a little inside baseball for you here.
Yeah.
When I first came to Rogers in 2009, and probably within the first couple of months I'd been there, I'm sitting in the office of one of the program directors. Actually, I'll just say it. The statute of limitations is long since over, and I don't think he'd make a big deal out of it. But so I'm sitting in Don Collins' office one day, and we're just talking. And he says, "Jimmy, let me tell you something. 570 News almost didn't make it." And I said, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah. When they hired me to come in and fix 570 News, they were getting ready to shut it off. Rogers was this close to actually shutting it off. This is back when he got there in 2008, 2007, 2008. At that point, they were looking at shutting it off. And they just thought, we're not going to be able to make a go of it. But they decided, all right, let's go with this new format with the news wheel in the morning and with Gary and Jeff during the middays and so on. And because I'll be honest, I wasn't that familiar with the history of the station up until that point, but they were. It was kind of like, all right, this is the last gasp. This is the final play of the ball game here. If this doesn't work, the game's over. Well, it did work for a while, and they had some good ratings. They had some good numbers, and obviously we've had some other people come through since Don left, and things change like they always do in radio, but with what's going on with AM radio right now, and it's sad, but you got to look at it from a financial standpoint. It is hard to get listeners, and it's even that much more harder to generate revenue, and that's the key to what's going on with this. And with with Rogers, if you notice that, and I didn't even notice this, to be honest with you, because you just kind of glaze over. My eyes glaze over after a while because of all the stuff that Rogers does. They've done a ton of marketing. They do a ton of marketing, all the things that they have, all the stuff that they do. And, my wife and I were watching the Blue Jays and everything. We're fans. And of course, Rogers is pushing all kinds of stuff and all kinds of things. And I get the emails and everything. And you just kind of, after a while, it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Well, not all that long ago, they changed the name of the company to Rogers Sports and Entertainment. And that's the key. Rogers is evolving into a sports and entertainment company. They acquired the rest of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, as you well know.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're on top of this. They acquired the rest of that, which gives them the Toronto Raptors, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto FC, the Argonauts. They have, I believe they own BMO. I know they'll have Scotiabank Arena and the Rogers Center. And not only that, Ollie, they own the delivery system for all of these properties, internet and television. So what do you think they're going to do? They're putting all their eggs into one basket. And of course, they'll have City TV still, and they'll have Sportsnet. But basically what's going to happen, honestly, I think the way it's going is you're going to see a company, a sports and entertainment media giant here in Canada that happens to own a handful of broadcast licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it that way on purpose. Radio is going to become, maybe outside, not out, with outside of Toronto, is going to become a kind of a secondary thing. It'll make them a little bit of money. Now, what's going to happen, say, in this area where you and I happen to be located, Kitchener's just down the road from me, and I'm in Brantford, for those who don't know. But I lived in Kitchener for a while. But, stations like Country 106.7 and Chime, which has been around for a long, long time. And those stations, I don't think they're going away just yet. I don't think they're going anywhere. But at some point, you're going to see things, you're going to see some more people leave. It's going to become more of a, they'll be doing what we call voice tracking. They'll be, importing, talent from other markets. Now, Kitchener's kind of in a unique situation because it's so close to Toronto, which is in Canada, it's the number one market in Canada. And it was funny. When I worked at Rogers, one of the guys at the station, at the group, you might remember the name Neil Beaumont.
Yes.
Yeah, Boomer, as we called him, or he called himself Boomer. But he and I would joke around about working at the, because I worked at Chime, working at the number one radio station and the 11th most listened to market in Canada. We would just joke about that. Kitchener was the 11th largest market in Canada at that time. I don't know where it sits now, but you're like a step away from going to the big time. If a lot of guys and gals would go, say, from 570 or from Chime to Toronto.
Yes.
And it was, they would just, because it was just right part of it down the road, and it was easy. And, in my world, from growing up in the U.S., that would be like me working in Columbus, Ohio, or St. Louis, or maybe even Cleveland or whatever, and then going to Detroit, going to Chicago, going to New York. It was that kind of a step. So Kitchener is not necessarily small potatoes. Same with Ottawa. It's not small potatoes. And I think they're going to. They kept their the news talk in Ottawa, I believe, and
that
Montreal,
shut down first, actually.
Oh, that did shut. That's gone. Okay.
Yeah, that went about maybe 3 years ago now.
Oh, I guess it did go away.
And they did the same thing. They returned you know how they returned the licenses? They did the same thing with that. That's what they did at first.
Okay, I wasn't aware. I figured they'd keep it because of being the capital and all of the politics going on there, and being able to say, okay, we keep Cormac McSweeney in Ottawa. He's kind of the mouthpiece for all the political stuff that's going on out of Ottawa, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently not. Okay, but that's really what it's come down to. AM radio in general is it's slowly dying, and it's sad. because I grew up at a time when you could dial around the radio in the middle of the night and you could hear all kinds of different things. You'd listen to a top 40 station out of Chicago. WLS was my favorite station that I like to pull in at night, because to me, that was just such an incredible radio station. Or CKLW out of Windsor, Detroit was another big one. Or you had, KFI and, KHJ and WABC and just a number of other radio stations all around the country. And if you could pull them in at night, some of these big ones, WBT, which recently just shut off their AM signal, you could hear WBT at night. And these were all big, huge top 40 monsters. And people listen to these things. And and nobody thought anything of it. It was just, hey, that's listening to the radio. Well, that's changed because, and I don't know how well this is going to relate to you, who is totally blind. I have some vision, but AM radio is becoming black and white to what, it's kind of like black and white to TV. You don't see any black and white stations anymore. You don't see any, all the analog stations TV stations are all gone. They're all digital and how they're being delivered. And AM radio, they could have gone digital with it, but HD radio in general across North America just hasn't caught on. It really hasn't. They've tried it. I remember when they implemented it in the States in probably about 20 years ago, and where I was working, and they were saying, oh, you got to get all this HD equipment. And the engineers are scrambling to get it put in and get it running, and nobody was listening. And they tried all the different things to say, okay, let's do secondary channels. Let's take, for example, in Pittsburgh, where they had a rock station, WDVD, or WDVE rather, excuse me. DVD is in Detroit, but WDVE was a rock station. And what they did was they took their sports talk station and put it on the secondary channel. On the tertiary or the third channel, they put an all Pittsburgh Penguins station. Old games from the past and talk shows. If you were a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, you were a Pittsburgh Penguin junkie, you could listen to that stuff all year round. Well, it never caught on. It's still there. I don't know if they're doing that kind of stuff on the station anymore, but there's just never been a demand for it. And I think that's why digital AM never really caught on. The thing that they've done also in the States, which I wish they would do here, and I think it might have saved some of these stations, is that a lot of stations in the States, a lot of AM stations, and I was talking to somebody about this morning, where they would get a repeater or a translator signal, just a small signal, like just maybe barely 100 watts or 200 watts. It might cover the city, it might not, but you could listen in your car driving around town on FM, on a small little dinky little signal. But if you got outside of town, you just would go over and you'd listen to the stream. And that's what a lot of stations are doing, and what some companies are beginning to do, like iHeart, which I used to work for back in the days when it was Clear Channel. They have started to just not renew the licenses of some of these stations. When they come up for renewal, they just turn in the license and they just tell everybody, you can listen to the secondary HD or the secondary stream or a translator channel, and they would just attach it to another radio station. That's how that all works. You didn't have to be attached to an AM signal. You could be attached to another FM, and that's basically what has happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it really is sad. So this doesn't surprise me at all. The only, the two real big losers in all this are obviously the people that worked at these stations, but the big one are the listeners, because there are people that listen to 570 News. I know you were a big fan of 570 News.
Oh,
and
I was.
A lot of other people. Sure, because it was a nice way to find out what's going on, what's happening locally. And Rogers just decided it's not worth our time. It's not worth the money. So that's really why they have decided to just go ahead and just pull the plug. And I think what's really sad is it wasn't like, on September 1st, 570 News will be signing off forever. No, they just shut it off. It was like, this is the last day. It's gone after today. Goodbye. Thank you very much. I think that's just terrible, because
there was no warning about it either. There was no announcement either.
No. They obviously were very tight-lipped about this, and I will tell you that stuff like this doesn't just necessarily happen overnight. They'll say, well, after careful deliberation and they think about it, but as far as they've known that this is coming. This is if you were to be able to be a fly on the wall in some of these meetings, this has been in the works for a while. Mm-hmm. I don't know how long. I don't think they just decided, decided last Monday, let's shut them all off. No, this has been going on for a while, because you think about when you let go as many people as they have, and this is with any company, the HR department has to get all their ducks in a row and send out severance packages and et cetera, et cetera. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen at the drop of a hat. But obviously they were very tight-lipped about it. And, the writing was on the wall. And I wouldn't be surprised, because a couple of people that I've known at the group of stations in Kitchener, who I had a lot of respect for, both a couple of people I knew retired within the last 18 months, 12 to 18 months. And I think they knew that the writing was on the wall. So it's like, let's just get out and call it a day.
Yeah, I mean, but why didn't they, are you, I would have thought at least that they would have considered selling it to one of the smaller entities like White Oaks or My Broadcasting or something.
Well, this is the problem, Ollie, is that when you could sell it, but keep in mind the land, for example, that 570, the transmitter site for 570 News, CKGL, sits on, it's valuable property. There's, I think it's a 4 antenna array that they had, mm-hmm. and it takes up a big chunk of land. It's not just a tiny little piece of land, sitting in the city somewhere or sitting out in the middle of nowhere. It's property that a developer or whoever is looking at going, I can make some money with this. And so they're willing to pay top dollar. And companies like Rogers and Bell, and especially Chorus, who are really hurting for cash. They are. These companies are not swimming in dough anymore. And they're trying to make everything back that they can. And when they can sell off, in this case, we'll say 5 pieces of property. I know there was a 6th station that they shut off, but I don't know the logistics of where their transmitter antenna sat, because with an FM, you can have multiple signals on one tower. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing for another day if you really want to be getting into radio geekdom. But like all these AM stations all sat on big pieces of property, and you think about how many millions of dollars these properties could be worth. I don't know how much the land for the station for the transmitter site for CKGL went for or would go for, but it's a lot of money. And you add that up, that's a nice little chunk of change to go into the coffers, and the accountants are all going, "Yep, helps the bottom line here, and we don't have to pay these people anymore." However, when contracts and so on and severances run out, that's a bunch of less salaries we have to pay for. And I think what it is, to answer your question, just, someone comes to you and says, "You want to buy my radio station?" I wouldn't buy an AM radio station right now, simply because it's too expensive to run. You would have to put so much money into it. Because I remember having the conversation with Don Collins about, you remember when K-Fun in
yes.
Kitchener signed on, and they turned off, was it Oldies 1090?
Yes, that's right.
And I said, why wouldn't we just put Rogers take that, or Bell take that and make it a sports talk? And Don says, it's not worth the money. It's not worth the investment. It would take years and years and years for them to build up a following, a reputation to make this thing go, in marketing. And that's the thing. That's the big thing about radio, especially nowadays, is that once you put a station on the air, even if it's on a great signal, that everybody can get, you have to get out there with one heck of a megaphone, so to speak, as a mentor of mine would say. You have to have one hell of a megaphone, and to tell everybody, hey, we're here. Billboards, bus boards, television ads, newspaper ads, going out and handing out T-shirts and going out and handing out this, that, and the other thing, because that's how we used to do it. You would go out and you would just be all over, out on the streets. You'd be at every event that existed. You'd hand out bumper stickers, keychains, T-shirts, all kinds of stuff saying, hey, we're here. And it costs money. It costs money to do that stuff. And the companies just don't want to spend it anymore. I mean, when I was, I think about some of the money that was spent with some of the radio stations I worked with when we did promotions in that, and it was large amounts of money, and they just don't want to budget that anymore. And it's too bad, because that's what made radio fun. The listeners liked it, because you could go out somewhere and you could say, hey, join Ali Musa. He's going to be out at the mall this afternoon from 3 until 6. Stop by the van and blah, 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 whatever's going on. And they people go out and they come out to meet their favorite disc jockey, or they would, or whoever, and they would give away stuff. And just sometimes they would even I remember back in the day, radio stations would say, we're going to have the, we'll just say the WLS Mountain Dew prize van out at the mall, such and such, tomorrow afternoon, stop by and get free Mountain Dew T-shirts and Mountain Dew and all this other stuff. Pick up this, that, and the other thing, pick up a WLS card. And what those were is like if you had a WLS card, for example, that's what they did. That had a number on it, and you'd register the card. You'd send in your name and your number to the card that you have. It was like a little piece of plastic, like a credit card. And they would do contests, and they'd say, okay, here's a winning WLS card number. And if you heard your card number, you called in and you won a prize. Sometimes they were big prizes, but it was a way to get people to listen to the radio station. But, in those days, companies were willing to spend the money for that kind of stuff, large amounts of money, but they're not willing to do it anymore. And also they're not able to get the sponsors to say, like, hey, Mountain Dew, could you, for this campaign, rather than, you giving us cash for putting your commercials on, how about we do T-shirts and, give away some prizes, and they do what is called trade. Not a lot of people are doing that anymore. It's the whole thing is just completely, it's changed as far as how it's all delivered. And it's sad because radio in some ways is kind of eating itself alive. And it's a shame because it is a necessary entity because of what is out there. People want to get up in the morning and they want to know, how am I going to dress today? Like, for example, where you and I are, it's a bright sunny day. It's warm. It's summer-like. It's going to get warm over the next few days. Hey, the kid's going to go out to the splash pad today. Make sure you wear your sunscreen, that kind of stuff. They want to know what's going on. Or, hey, the Blue Jays won last night, which they didn't.
No.
We could talk about that. I'm not going to. I don't want to get depressed. But,
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You learned about what was going on in your backyard. And you really don't see that much anymore. And it's really sad. Like, kind of circling back here, listening to the radio at night. You could get on the radio at night, or listen, dial around the radio at night and hear all kinds of stations, and you didn't quite know what you're going to get. Now it's like, I think the only thing you're hearing is the Red Eye Radio Network or Coast to Coast AM. And, and that's pretty much it, or a rerun from the earlier talk show that ran during the day earlier. Okay.
Or Westwood One Sports if you want.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you still have a few all-night sports shows. There's a few of them out there, but the thing is, every market has probably has a Westwood One Sports or ESPN Radio, and they're fine, but it's not like what it used to be. Where
No.
you could, when I did all-night radio. Now, granted, I wasn't on any stations that had, these huge signals that you could hear over 38 states and 10 Canadian provinces. No, I worked on stations that I just was fortunate enough that you could hear them for about an hour and a half in any given direction at night. So, people were listening at night. You get people calling, working at the hospital, people driving a taxi cab or whatever they were doing, or just sitting up all night doing whatever. And, they call the disc jockey and give him a hard time or whatever. Or, the lonely women that would call the radio station, or the suicidal people that would call. I had it all. I mean, I've experienced just about everything from propositions to death threats at night. But people listened. That was the point. People listened. Mm-hmm. And now it's not like that anymore. And it's kind of how radio is evolving. What you and I remember, and more so myself, because I've been doing this. I started doing radio in 1983 and grew up listening to radio in the 70s. Radio was an event. The disc jockeys were the stars. And, and I listened to the radio because I like particular disc jockeys, as we call them, or as some people here call them announcers. But you listen because there was a personality that you really liked. And I know you even have, because of some of the people locally that you like to listen to, because it's like, I remember someone said to Rush Limbaugh, not long before he passed away, when he was doing his show. And this guy called up, and I kid you not, Ollie, he was almost in tears. He could barely keep himself together. He said, "Rush, I want you to know something. You're the best friend I never met."
That says something.
Well, absolutely it does. To be able, to connect with your audience, and you've heard me say this before to you many, many times, you have to know how to connect with your audience, because that's the key. They get to know you. Maybe they never met you. Maybe they never actually have hung out with you, but they know you enough that they feel like, Ollie Moose is a friend of mine because, he likes Blue Jays baseball, or he likes this, or he's into, whatever else is going on. And you're talking about that. You're relatable. And that's what people want. They like the one-on-one communication. It's such a cliche thing. How do you talk to people on the radio? You talk to them at one person at a time. And that's, if you do that, and the ones that are good, the ones that have been around doing it the most, the John Oakleys of the world, the Mike Farwells of the world, and when Gary Doyle was doing it, and some of the other ones that have, and our buddy Mr. Green.
Yes.
Was on. Yeah. They talk to their audience one person at a time. And when you do that, that's what works. But it's not it's not as easy anymore because of the way we consume radio. Mm-hmm. It's not like you listen to the radio like every night, because like when I grew up, it was like you'd listen to the radio at night and you'd go to school the next day and it's like, hey, I heard Jim on the radio last night, or I heard, hey, you were talking about you on the radio last night, because you called the station and you made a comment about something, or you won a contest or whatever. And, sometimes they put phone calls on the air and all that stuff. But it was an event. It was something that people could attract to. But because of streaming, and there's nothing wrong with technology, but for example, you'd turn on the radio and you'd listen for your favorite song, or you'd call the radio station and say, hey, can you play such and such, whatever song? And you'd listen for that song. You wait for hours. And I'd have people that would call me and say, I want to record this song. And they would wait with a tape recorder ready to go. As soon as I hit that song, bam, they're recording that song off the radio, that kind of thing. But they don't do that anymore, because you can pick up your phone, you can pick up your wireless device, and you can listen to your favorite song whenever you want. You don't have to wait for somebody to play it for you. And that's with anything.
Yep.
Your podcast, it's there anytime you want it. But radio, in some regards, it's kind of nice. Like for my station, it's classic hits essentially. And if you just want to listen to some music from that era, and put it onto the background and just have it play, you can. And people still like that. I mean, go to the restaurants and you'll hear, they've got, Stingray music on or one of the Sirius XM channels or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, locally they'll have one of the local radio stations that's on. They'll put them on and just to have some music. And people do like that. But to be what you'd call purposeful listening, it's becoming less popular because young people today didn't grow up with that.
No.
You think how long cell phones have been around. First one was when did Apple come out with their first phone? 2006, 2007, maybe like 2008 or 2009.
Yeah.
Think about that's almost 20 years ago.
Yep.
That would be these kids who were around when this stuff came out. They were just they were babies. They didn't know any different. They didn't know what it was like before the days of an Apple phone or an Android phone. This is all they've ever known. And so how they consume this, how they, obtain their media, it's all they know. It's like I grew up, watching Saturday morning cartoons. Saturday morning cartoons don't exist anymore because you don't need them. When my parents were little, there was no television. They didn't, what's television? It's like when what's the internet? I didn't see the internet. First time I saw AOL was in 1991.
Uh-huh.
And it was a friend of mine who got it, and he says, "Hey, got to see this thing. It's called AOL." I'm like, "What's AOL?" And it's on this thing. It's called the internet. And I'm like, "Okay." And with the little dial-up modem, and it made the noises, and it connected, and it's like, and I remember a friend of mine, actually, who I'm going to see this weekend in Chicago. This is probably back in 2000 or not. It was like 1997, actually. Yeah, 97, 98. They started having the instant messenger thing, and he says, "I'm chatting with a buddy of mine in Des Moines, Iowa," and he typed something, and then his buddy would type something back, and he's like, "Isn't that cool? That's amazing!" And now you just kind of like, "Oh, I'll text my friend Ollie here. Hey, Ollie, what's going on?"
Yeah.
You reply back, and it's nothing. Or when you get your first cell phone, I got my first cell phone in 1992, 93, and it was so cool. This big, huge brick sitting in the car next to me. We're going down the road, and I'm like, I got to call a friend of mine. You call, and you're like, "Hey, guess where I am?" And you're like, "What?" "So I'm on the highway. We're heading to your." "No kidding. Well, that's so cool." Now you don't even think about it. So it's just like anything else. Things change. Things evolve. And radio is just going through one of those evolutions. And we all wondered, for those of us who are old enough to remember, 20 years ago, golly, I wonder what radio is going to be like. And I mean, it was funny. I don't know. Have you ever been exposed to WKRP in Cincinnati?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, you never really, and I can understand why. WKRP was a great television program, and because it talked about, it was a fictional radio station in Cincinnati, Ohio, with a misfit of disc jockeys and a staff, and every character on the show, anybody who's worked in radio back in the day worked with somebody like one of the characters on the station. Well, there was an episode where one of the characters, he has a dream. He falls asleep. It's a Christmas episode. And it was kind of like the old Ebenezer Scrooge kind of thing. Christmas past, Christmas future, present and Christmas future. Well, when he got to the future part, he was the only employee left at the radio station. And he was sitting next to this little box with these flashing numbers. And, and in his dream, he's looking at himself and the ghost of Christmas future saying, "Everybody at the station is gone. There's nobody left except for Herb." And Herb is sitting there in this big empty chasm, with this little box going. And Ollie, that's where we're at today.
Yes.
That's where we're at. And I don't know if I told you the story about, I went back to one of my old cluster radio stations a few years ago and went in to see a friend of mine who was doing the morning show. And he did the morning talk show, and I said, "I'm going to be in town." He said, "Well, come by the station." I'm like, "Fred, I don't want to bother you while you're on the radio." He says, "No, come on in." So I come in, and it's like 8:00, last hour of his show, and they get done with the news, and He goes back on. He had a guest with him for a couple of minutes. They leave, and he says, "Come on the air." I'm like, right now? He says, right now. I'm like, okay, why not? So we did. We talked on the air for about 45 minutes, got off the radio, and he says, maybe Sarah wants to see some of the studios you used to work in, because it was the same building.
Yeah.
And we walked around to all these studios, because there are now in that building, there are now like 5 radio stations altogether. There used to be 3, and they added 2 more.
Right.
And we walked around the station to all these different studios. Ollie, would you like to take a guess how many people were in that building? That, everybody in the building all together. Just take a guess.
Okay, I'm going to guess there was no more than 10, or I think it was even less.
6, including my wife and myself.
Wow, 6. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
4 people, and it has shrunk. They've gotten rid of a few people since then. He is the last man standing. He's still there. iHeart just went through a big round of layoffs, and they just got rid of a whole bunch of people. And now it is down. He is literally, he's not the very last. They do have an army of salespeople, but they don't work in the building anymore.
No.
And I'm not even sure where the general manager was. I don't even know if they have a general manager. They had a VP of operations or something, they called him. And but walking around this building, when I was there, Ollie, there was almost 150 people working there. And it was like a beehive of activity. It was busy, from basically, there was a beehive of activity in that radio station from about 3:30 in the morning until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock every night. And then, of course, when it got, usually it was, when you were the all-night guy, you were the only one left until the news people started showing up at 3:30 in the morning. And, the morning shows started getting ready and coming in to do their thing. So, but it's changed. It's just, It's very different. And now what iHeart has done is they have since moved out of that building into a much smaller studio, or much smaller studios, or if you want to call it. Like, for example, the studio where he does his show, it is set up so when he signs off at 9 o'clock in the morning, he signs out, everything goes dark in that studio, and it is set up so that if somebody, say from their station in Columbus, WTVN, which is a news talk station, say the guy is doing he's doing a special program, he can go on and do his show on WTVN in Columbus from those studios in Toledo or New York or Chicago or Detroit or wherever he happens to be, and nobody's going to be able to tell the difference. It's plug and play. All the logos for the station that he's on come up. Everything configures to his station. It's plug and play. And all the other radio stations in that building now are essentially sitting in a closet. There's no live disc jockeys anymore. There's no live people anymore. It's all handled by, computer. It's all centrally programmed out of a central location, and it's all just kind of condensed. And like Rogers has, they started down that road a long time ago. Mm-hmm. When I think I might have told you this story. When I was, right before I left, the traffic department, the people that handle all the commercials and all that kind of stuff, they handled the books and scheduling all the commercials and all that. They went through an extensive training program to learn how this brand new system that they were using called Wide Orbit, how this thing was going to work. And they spent months. I remember the girls in the department going to training classes and going for this thing for months and months, learning how to use this stuff. And so they said, okay, we're switching over to Wide Orbit today. And the head of the traffic department showed me one of the logs. And I'm looking at the list of commercials for the day, and I see all these codes to the right of the commercials. I see KW, Kitchener-Waterloo. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I said, they're going to centralize this. And Neil Beaumont looked at me and said, no. So you want to bet? 6 months later, the entire traffic department was broomed. They were all gone. Everything was handled out of Toronto.
Yeah, and that's
They
the
were
other
getting ready
side of
for
it too. Yeah. And what about just before we what about now they had the Blue Jays rights? I mean, of course that was in-house. Yes. But what do you think happens there? Do you see that moving to the country station? I don't think so, but
I don't think so. Because you can stream.
Yes.
I honestly, because somebody asked me about that. Actually, it was a name that you might remember, Brian Davis, who worked at Country and also at Chime for a long time. Brian's a very good friend of mine. We get together about 3 or 4 times a year and have dinner or have lunch or something. As a matter of fact, we're working on getting together. It would be Brian Davis and producer Paulie from the Mike Farwell show.
Producer Paulie, he's actually going to be coming up in a couple of days.
Oh, okay. Well, make sure you tell him I said hello.
I sure will.
He's a good guy. Yeah, we're going to get together one of these days here, probably sometime after I get back from Chicago, and we're going to have lunch. And we get together, and we kind of call it. It's very tongue in cheek. We call it the Radio Losers Club. It's basically a bunch of us radio refugees who have no place to go, and we get together and just have a meal. And it started with me when we started. When some of my buddies started getting canned. This is in the States.
Yeah.
And we would start, some of us that were still working would invite some of these guys out for a mercy lunch. Hey, so-and-so just got canned. Let's take them out to lunch. Mm-hmm. And then more and more of us started getting fired. And so it turned into the Radio Losers Club. We call this edition of the Radio Losers Club to order. Oi! And just like being a part of the lodge. Those old, the Elks Lodge or the Moose Lodge or something, and just having, we just get together and have meals and just talk radio and talk shop and, and just reminisce or what have you. But anyway, we were talking about that, just how things have changed and what's going on with just kind of how things have evolved and how centralized it's all become. He was asking me, Brian was asking me, what do you think's going to happen to Farwell and the Rangers? I said, well, maybe they'll put them on Country 106. And he's like, I don't know if country music fans don't like hockey. And it's like, you don't know that. It's not like what it used to be. And that's the thing. It's hard to break some of those habits. I remember Alan Cross. I was at a dinner once. I was at a Conestoga dinner. When I first came to the company, I was invited. They said, why don't you come along? And Alan Cross was the keynote that night. And he was talking. He says, I'm going to be fascinated and excited to see what you young people come in and do with what us old farts don't want to do anymore, as far as doing things differently. We don't want to, it's not we don't want to do radio. I say this to people all the time. When they retire or they've got let go, I say, okay. And they'll say, that's it, I've had enough. And I say, well, not so fast. You may get out of radio, but radio never gets out of you.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm a classic example of that. I mean, I haven't been on terrestrial radio in probably about 15 years.
Yeah.
Not regularly. I've made a few little appearances here and there on occasion, but my terrestrial radio career is done. But I don't say my radio career is done because I'm still doing it. I took a little break for a little while, but now I'm doing it. I'm back on. I'm doing what I do. And you can say, well, it's just an internet radio station. Like, yeah, so's AM, so's FM, so's satellite. It's internet. It's the same thing. You treat it with the respect that it deserves. You think of, and I don't know of anybody that's doing this here, but are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Glenn Beck from the States?
Yes, I know the name.
Okay, Glenn Beck started off as a disc jockey. I'll try to make this quick. Started off as a disc jockey and worked his way up a bit and started doing talk radio. And someone said to him, one of the big companies, Premier in the U.S., came to him and said, "Would you like to have a syndicated, nationally syndicated show?" So he did, happened right around 9/11 of all times, and it was when you would talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Hey, your first show is going to be right after 9/11. Have a good show, and you've never done this before, a national show. And he said that he was just absolutely just scared out of his wits trying to do this, but he made it. So he goes on, he begins to get more affiliates, he begins to get more success, and then he decides, I'm going to start my own television station. Well, he doesn't have the money for a satellite, but he has the money for studios. He has the money for all the backing for all of the stuff that he had started his own company. So he puts the Blaze on. It's his own channel. It is a 24/7 streaming television station, and it looks as good as anything that's out there, anything in the world. And you subscribe to it. You can watch it. You can watch stuff on demand. He's got stuff up on YouTube. It doesn't. The point is that it doesn't matter what delivery system you're using, whether it's AM, FM, if it's over the air or if it's internet. It's how you treat it, and that's the
I agree
key.
with that.
So, and that's what he does, and he's done very well with it. And by the way, he's not the only one who's done it. There's other folks who have done it and are making a go of it. But he was like, I don't need a satellite. I don't need a cable license. Well, in the States, you don't have to have a cable license to broadcast, but I don't need a cable outlet. I got the internet, and everybody thought he was crazy, but it's worked. It's done very well for him. And he is branched out into other things and is built quite the brand. And that's when, like Don Collins has said to you, Ollie, you don't need radio anymore.
No, you don't.
This is just another way to deliver it. And so what people are doing now is they're going over to streaming. And it's like television. My wife doesn't watch hardly any live TV anymore. We don't watch hardly any live TV anymore, except we're watching baseball in the spring and summer, and watching college football and basketball in the fall and winter.
NFL?
And the NFL. Yes, we are. We're watching the NFL too. But that's what we like, and that's what we get into. And she'll watch some movies and that, and we'll get some stuff on demand, and she'll watch movies on demand and that kind of thing, and all the cooking shows and so on, and that she really likes because that's kind of her wheelhouse. I can only watch Guy Fieri so much. I mean, he's a great guy. Seems like a pretty cool guy, self-made millionaire, and has done well for himself. But I can only watch so many episodes of Guy's Grocery Games. She could sit and watch them all night long, and I just my eyes kind of glaze over, and I grab my phone. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go find something else to listen to. So that's okay. Yeah. But that's just the thing. It's how we consume this stuff. And AM radio, when you have poor signals, they don't sound as good. The fidelity isn't as good as it used to be. You're probably too young to remember when AM stereo was a thing. And AM stereo actually had a chance. And it didn't, if you had the right receiver, that was the problem. AM stereo in North America, never made the standard for what it was going to be, because there's 3 different ways you can broadcast in AM stereo, and they never completely settled on it. If you had we'll just call them A, B, and C. If you had a receiver that got type A and the local station you had broadcast in AM stereo B, you weren't going to hear it in stereo. It was just going to sound like mono. And it never caught on, and it just kind of died on the vine. But it didn't sound too bad, and ultimately it probably would have saved some music stations from going away probably by a few years or something. But ultimately, it wasn't going to save it. And, that's just kind of how it's gone.
It has. You see, and to be honest for me, I wasn't surprised. People, I mean, people did mention it, did talk to me about it. Like, they asked me what was going on with that, with the whole 5-star news thing. I said, you know what? I'm not surprised. Because I guess the difference is that I've been following the industry.
Well, I have too, but I've also...
Right? Isn't that the difference between... Yeah.
Yeah. The difference is that you've been following it for a little while. I've been following it probably since I got into it 40 years ago.
Yeah,
And
I should have said we both have. Yeah.
Well, in different ways. Your time reference is going to be a little different from mine, and also just simply because one thing that Canadian radio had going for it is that music stations stuck around a little bit longer in Canada on AM than they did in the States.
Right. Okay.
A lot of stations started flipping over to news talk or whatever they ended up doing, probably in the 80s. Like, for example, I'll give you a few examples, like CKLW in Windsor, Detroit. That was a station that I grew up listening to and listened to that station as a kid. And, even down in Toledo, an hour away, we could hear it clear as a bell. That was what everybody listened to. I think I told you this. It at one time was the third most listened to radio station in the world. At one time, it was that big, that powerful as far as just audience. They were number one in Toledo. They were number one in Cleveland. Hundreds of about 100 miles away from Detroit. They were number one, beat everybody in the market. That's unheard of. Would never happen today. But anyway, they flipped in 1984. WABC in New York flipped from music to talk in 1982. WLS in Chicago hung on a little bit longer, but they kind of became what we call a full-service adult contemporary station. The last several years, they played music, a lot of talk shows. I think they were like all talk at night, but they played some music during the day. But they finally flipped to talk in 1989. Right. And that just to kind of give you an idea. But you think about even like where I worked at CKPC, the AM station was playing music. It always had played music to some degree. But when it was like the classic hits that it was when I was there, that was going on, in 2008. It was still doing that.
And they shut down,
it was too. And that's gone. Yeah. That's the whole thing. Evanov decided, well, we don't want to spend any more money on this. We don't want to put any more money into it. Let's sell the building where the stations sat, the studios on West Street. That building is empty. And it's been sold. It will soon be demolished, and they're going to put up a senior care center of some kind. I don't remember exactly what it's going to be. Yeah. And the AM transmit. Well, but they moved the studios. Right. They've moved the studios down the street to where Rogers TV in Brantford is. They moved it down the street into that building, not with the TV station, but it's in the same group of buildings, and it's in a different suite of its own. 92.1, Light 92. It's there along with, with the country station. Oh, right. Which they turn the power up so that you can, get it. It has a pretty good signal here in the immediate Brantford area. You don't have to have an antenna and stand on your roof and hold up the antenna hoping you can get it. We're able to get the CRTC to give them granted them the license to turn the power up, because it was just a 200-watt signal. It was just a tiny little signal, just religious station. Well, they changed it. They moved the religious stuff over to the AM. They put the country on the FM, got the power turned up, and I even think at that point they knew they were going to get rid of the AM at some point, but they had to wait. And that was their plan, and so they shut off the AM. It was a year or two ago, and sold the property. Took the towers down and sold the property, made a nice little chunk of change. They sold the building on West Street, that property. That's a nice little chunk of change. Moved them into a small, tiny little facility, much smaller than what the studios on West Street were. And it's rented, but they're not paying near as much in overhead. If the roof leaks or something goes wrong, that's the landlord's problem. And if it gets real bad, they could say, okay, we're going to move. Yeah. So it's one less thing they have. It's all about money. It's all about the bottom line. And it doesn't, you talk about heritage and what, 1380 meant to Brantford as a radio station. They don't care. No. They're not interested. No, they don't care.
They absolutely don't.
And I've caught a lot of flack from the Evenaugh people over that because I know some of them, and and it's like I'm sorry, I don't. It's nothing personal, but your company doesn't give a crap about the local market. You want to be, they want to be, 92.1 is a good signal. So they're going, let's try to compete in Kitchener-Waterloo. Let's try to compete
that's what they're
in
doing.
Hamilton. Well, they're trying to. I don't think they're making, I don't know the numbers per se, but when they flipped it to the Jewel, when I was at Rogers, I can guarantee you that, the management team at Rogers Communications in Kitchener, they were not afraid of the station.
No.
It didn't bother them a bit. It's like, okay, fine. It's like kind of like the old, go away, kid, you bother me.
Yeah.
It's just, they weren't worried about them.
No.
I mean, they took them serious, but they weren't like, oh my gosh, we got another station to worry about. They didn't care.
No, of course not.
And that's just, they're not, but okay, they bought the stations from the Buchanan family, and that's what they want to do with them. Okay, that's the one thing that I learned a long time ago. When you work for an owner, whether it be an individual person or a big corporation, it's their stick, referring to the transmitter, the tower and all that, because it looks like a big stick sticking up out of the ground out in the middle of nowhere because these towers are tall and they're thin. But, it's their stick, and they can do what they want with it. And that's kind of how you have to look at it.
Yeah.
So with Rogers, with these stations, it's their sticks. They can do with it what they want. It's their sandbox, their toys.
Yep.
If they want to take their toys and go home, there's nothing you can do about it.
No.
And it's unfortunate. I mean, I have no animosity. I'm just sad. I mean,
exactly. Yep. Hey, and who's coming up next is Pete Travers.
I haven't talked to Pete in a long time.
He's coming next.
He keeps trying to sell me real estate.
Oh, I know.
He keeps sending me all these things, and that's fine. I mean, that's what Pete does. I mean, I remember real quick. I remember when we sold our house in Kitchener to return to Brantford, and I asked Pete to give me I just wanted a little tidbit of information about just what do you think? This is what we're doing. I'll tell you what, Ollie, he definitely let me know what I needed to do. And it wasn't derogatory or anything, but boy, he gave me all kinds of information because that's Pete Travers. He's a salesman, God bless him. I hope he's doing well. Send him my best when you talk to him.
I will. And of course, he's coming up, and we will have producer Paulie coming up on Wednesday. And of course, we do have the Allie and McCarra show coming up on Friday this week. And then, of course, between there on Wednesday, it's a Techstravaganza afternoons where we will be discussing moving applications on the iPhone's home screen. Well, Jim, we got to do this again real soon.
Sure, absolutely. Always fun to talk shop with you.
Oh yes, we have to do this. We got more stories.
Absolutely. So just real quick, run that list of stuff by me again so I don't forget what's coming up.
Okay, so on Monday. So we've got Pete Travers coming up in a few minutes. And then we have, on Wednesday, we have producer Paulie at 8 p.m. And then we have another Techstravaganza. Before that, in the afternoon, we have a Techstravaganza afternoons, which is a workshop, but it's also podcasted, where we will be discussing moving apps on the iPhone. And the Allie and McCarra show is coming up on Friday this week at 3:30 p.m., where we will be talking about the book. I think it's called Unseen.
Sounds good. And Ollie, I'll just leave you with this one thought.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Ready?
Yes.
Have a nice day.
And here's the outro.